you so much for being here tonight on this very sunny and beautiful August evening. And thank you for letting me share my pastel story with you. I'll stick this down here for now. So, as Bill was saying, I've been dealing with pastels for a while, but just a little bit about my family history. I was very blessed to have been brought up in a family that encouraged creativity. And if you can't hear me back there, just let me know, okay? Are you okay? Okay? Thank you. They encouraged creativity. Our father was quite artistic, and he used his artistic skills to enrich his ministry as a Lutheran pastor. He did things like design stained glass windows and build churches and paint great big huge altar scenes in our back bedroom. Put them in the churches, of course, and our mother lovingly put up with all the chaos. And the one thing they both did together was they encouraged each one of us to use our gifts and abilities in the best way possible to serve the Lord. So as Bill said, when I was in college, I started out in Arizona with an art major. And during my junior year, I transferred up to what was then DMLC, a long time ago. And I became, what I wanted to do was become a Lutheran day school art teacher. But I didn't just teach art. I had the opportunity to teach everything, including art, and I always had the opportunity to teach art. Matter of fact, one of my fourth grade students is back there. Hi, Kevin. Great guy, just a great guy. I'm so glad to see you here tonight. So why pastels? And I guess I have to remember a lot of things tonight. So the next one, why pastels? My background had been in oil, and I really do enjoy working with oils. But as time sort of unfolded, oils were less friendly in the home environment. So I messed around with a bunch of different kind of media and eventually settled on pastels because they just seemed to be more workable with my lifestyle. And a couple of other things sort of happened along the way that sort of pushed me in that direction. I was in a gallery in Milwaukee, actually with Ted and Kristen, a number of years ago, and they were featuring the artwork of a really amazing Milwaukee artist. And as we were admiring his work, the gallery owner said that he was featured in the latest issue of the Pastel Journal. So I went out and bought that journal, and in going through it, reading it from cover to cover, towards the very end, there was a little tiny advertisement about a new group that was forming in Milwaukee, and as Bill alluded to it before, it's the Wisconsin Pastel Artists. And anyone who was interested should call that number to find out more information. Well, I did. I called the number, was encouraged to attend the meeting, and ended up serving as vice president for a number of years, and I'm also still active in that group today. And through it, I have met amazing people, amazing artists from all over the world. And I guess there's a little life lesson here is don't hesitate to make the phone call because it can change your life. I did hesitate at first, but after being encouraged to go to the meetings, it was a great match. And at that time, I was looking for some mentorship in how to pastel. The second thing that really sort of changed my journey as well was a set of Sennelier pastels. As I was getting ready to retire from teaching, my faculty, knowing I wanted to become more active in the arts, gave me this set, a Sennelier. It's a landscape set, and was such a group already forming that I could join with a set of pastels. I really felt committed to go that direction. So this is your little who of pastels. The who. I'm going to give you just a and it's going to be like one of these minusculely history in, a little nutshell here. Pastels have always sort of been a roller coaster kind of medium. They ebb and tide. They're popular, they're not so popular, and it's just sort of the nature of them, I guess. But we know a lot of people used pastels before the 1700s. But about the beginning of the 1700s, it was like a perfect storm. You have a lot of rich people. You have the Rococo period coming into being with that soft, sort of diffuse look. So a lot of the pastel artists were starting to capitalize on that. And they were competing with the oil painters for the commissions. So they would advertise things like, you know, we can do ours faster because you don't have to sit and wait for your oils to dry. And so they would get the commissions, and they became very prolific at this time. This particular one is from the early 1700s, Rococo style. Remember, this is before the French Revolution. Wealth, a lot of the wealthy are going to pastel portraitures. This one is by Maurice, Quinton de Latour. It happens to be at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles. It is, again, they're competing with oil painters. So what he does, he takes his homemade paper, blue paper, homemade, about the width of a man's arm span, and he seams it together, puts it on canvas to sort of mock or mimic a oil painting. I didn't mean to say mock, I meant to say mimic an oil painting. And he does this so skillfully that you cannot find those seams in that piece. They actually had to use magnifying glasses and map it so that people looking at it could tell where the seams are. So it's really an exquisite piece, and he becomes very popular in this time period. Here's a close-up. It's on blue paper, and if you look around like the chin area, you can just see that little bit of hint showing through. I know a lot of oil painters use greens and blues to get in that flesh tone area. A lot of his pastels are homemade or handmade, and we know that his paper was handmade as well. So beginning of the Rococo period. This one, Kristen, you want to do your wonderful Italian? Isn't that pretty? When I heard her say it, I thought, I'm not going to butcher her name. It is just such a pretty name. But she was from Venice, and she was, again, very prolific, and you can just see the Rococo style in this muse. It has that really soft, sort of diffuse look about it. Again, the artists were very excellent in doing that. She was so good that she is actually called the godmother of pastel portraiture. Now, I have a Bill story. When I went on that trip years ago, we were in Venice, and we'd just gotten off the boat, literally, and we're sort of trying to get our bearings, and we're in one of the first galleries. And I'm looking around, and I'm gawking at everything, and you know, my tongue is hanging out because it's all this big, beautiful work all around. And Bill quietly comes up to me and says, Suzanne, save it for the really good stuff. And he was right, it already got better. But what my point is, she's from Venice, and among pastelists, she's considered one of the really good stuff. So, Rosella Carriera. And jumping ahead now, I should go back here. Okay, remember I told you this was before the French Revolution? Well, with the French Revolution, guess what happens to pastel? It goes out of vogue again because it had become associated with the rich. Now remember, this is just a little minuscule peek into history. There's a lot more that goes on, but they were associated with those gentry that were always having their portraits done. So we go on to the 1800s, and of course a lot of you recognize this artist, Mary Cassatt, just phenomenal pastelist of that particular time period. Her contemporary being Degas, and Degas was an interesting guy. My pastel friends are so giving and so kind. You have a problem, they help you through it. But Degas wasn't like that. He made his own pastels, he made his own fixatives, he didn't share. He didn't like to share any of his methods, and a lot of those things just simply disappeared when he did. And the last one I chose for this little mini art lesson, history lesson, is Cassatt, who is an American Impressionist artist. And he was basically just a pastel person. And here, of course, we have landscapes. And it's sort of like this one. It's, it's linear. There's a sea in the background. It's got a lot of the flowers. And you can see I like to do flowers in my landscapes as well. And I just sort of like his work. So what are pastels? They're not chalk, okay? They're not chalk paintings, and I'm not trying. This is a common thing that we get as pastel artists. Chalk is made of gypsum, compressed, not very much pigment in it. Pastels are the same pigment that you would find in an oil paint or a watercolor. It's just the binder that is different. So the binder is gypsum, a little bit of, not gypsum, excuse me, some sort of bulking powder, gum arabic, a little bit of water, made into a paste, which is where they get their name, pastel, paste. And it's made and is dried, is formed into shapes, dried, in this case rolled. Now, this particular pastels is made by the oldest company they profess to be the oldest company that has made them continuously through history. They've been in the market since the 1700s. Les Maisons of Paris. And I thought, gee, that would be sort of cool to have some of those, and I could compare them with my American ones that I can buy here in the States. And I went online, and this set of 12 cost 225 euros, which is $250 in American money, about $20 a stick. And I know a lot of other mediums can be expensive as well, but when you consider, I look at that set of 12, and I'm not going to do a lot of work with a set of 12 pastels. We'll go into that in a little bit, one of the downsides of pastels. They range from very soft and buttery and creamy to very hard. The more binder, the harder the pastel stick is. The more buttery. Schminke, the German-made Schminke, has a very beautiful, creamy, buttery pastel. I actually brought Dakota Pastel out of Washington State. Is a go-to place to get pastels. And they sent me this little pamphlet of all the different pastels that they carry, from the hard ones on the bottom to the very soft ones up at the top. So Schminke is one of the top ones up here. So when you are all doing another brutal, it might be brutal too, but brutal Minnesota, winter, worse than we had in Wisconsin, all you have to do is go to YouTube and watch this little Schminke, how soft pastels are made. It's short, but it's very informative, and it helps to explain why they're so expensive. For all the art students, please take one of these just as a reference. You might enjoy, or anybody else, just enjoy seeing what some of the products are like. They were so kind to send me quite a bit of material to share with you. In contrast, this is a set of half sticks Sennelier. You can get them for between $150 to $200 when they're running on sale. And I know that sounds like a lot, but this Paris edition will last a long time, even though they're half sticks. And it gives you a nice range of color. Because unlike oils or watercolor, if you want to get a nice gray tone, you can mix your complementary colors and you have a brand new color. But with pastels, if you don't have the color, you're going to have to layer the colors. And anytime you layer a color in pastel, the original color voice is still going to shine through. So if I'm putting orange and purple together, I will get a muted color, but you will still be able to see the colors that I just layered. It makes it part of the fun, but it also makes it one of the challenges. And as we have the different pastel sticks, we have the different papers. And if you thought there was a lot of choices in sticks, well, the papers are equally as you have tons of different surfaces. I bought, again, compliments of Dakota Pastel. On this table over here, all the substrates that Dakota Pastel carries, from very velour smooth to a very gritty, toothy surface. And those are just some of them. Some of them you can underwash with watercolor, acrylics, even oil, or pastels themselves. Others, you just have to use them as is. And a lot of substrates come already colored. This happens to be UArt paper, and it runs in a very smooth grade of 800, all the way, the one I think up here is the 400 being shown. They go as gritty as a 200. I use that 400 a lot in my work. It just sort of suits me well. Not only UArt, but that's the one sort of my go-to paper. Here's another one on the, would be your, that side. In different colors on the background. That one can also be underpainted. This, I believe, is Art Spectrum, and I have some of those up here on the table as well from Dakota Pastels. So please don't hesitate to touch and feel up here to see what some of these substrates are like. How to pastel. Here's a guide planarian. And for all you students out there or anybody else who's into the arts, you know that if you get outside and actually paint, you appreciate so much the colors and the nuances of light. Look at his setup. You know, this is not an easy gig. He's got all these different colors. He's by water. And there's also going to be bugs and all this other stuff. But I have to admire him. And I do, there it is, Shirley. I do go outside and I do paint, especially when we're out in Arizona. Notice there's no water around me. But if you look, you have to look really close to see my little setup there. And I know the light's not the best up here today, but it's right there. I've got my little table set up with my pastels that I carry to Arizona. And I do truly love being outside and painting outside, but it's a little bit clumsy with pastels. But having said that, I have a lot of friends that do it regularly, and I really enjoy their paintings that they do when they're plein-airing. This was one I did do in Arizona. The tree is actually right behind me. It's a Palo Verde tree, and I brought it, the picture I didn't bring the actual picture here, but it's just a study, and I liked the way I was able to capture the moving of the leaves through the Palo Verde, and you know, you don't get that from a photograph. So I'm just saying, art students, you know, get outside, you know, take your whatever and go outside and paint. You'll love it, and you're young. You don't have to, you know, you can carry all that stuff. This is my studio. I'm very blessed to be able to live in a facility that, and my husband is so gracious to let me take over this lower level of a condo. It's a walkout, and this happens to be northern exposure, which is just really a nice light for painting. I sort of see my setup, and it's amazingly clean in the photograph here. It doesn't usually look so good. Just a little close-up of it. That's just a, you know, a sampling of some of the pastels that I do have. This is my view outside of that window. We live by a marsh, and that's the backwaters of Lake Delavan near Lake Geneva. That's where we have retired. So it's in the show on one of the walls there. So I'm just going to work you through sort of how I go about painting a pastel painting. This is a piece of UArt 400 mounted onto a board, and I already have my story at this time. We had gone down to Texas, and we just had to get away from Wisconsin. We had to get warm. So we took a very spontaneous road trip down to Texas, and it happened to be the time of the year when the blue bonnets were supposed to be starting to bloom. And I made poor Ray drive all over South Texas looking for fields of blue bonnets, because I knew I wanted to do a picture of them. I took lots of pictures, but they weren't too prolific, and we really had to search for them. But so when I start this, I already had my story. You have to have a story. I think all work needs a story, so this is my story, searching for bluebonnets. And this is my basically taking the picture and breaking it down into sub-parts. I like to come up with about 5 abstract shapes. Maybe it's not the best example of it, because usually I do a little bit more abstract, but this was just sort of a little thumbnail sketch, because I already had my head full of what this picture was going to look like. So now I've taken, this is how I start. UArt paper is sanded. It receives, washes well. At the bottom of the corner there you see a couple of new art pastels. They are the hard ones. There's the dark, the medium, light tones, and you see alcohol, you see an old bristle brush. So what I'm going to do is I take those colors and assign them a space. So my dark becomes my darkest value, and so forth. So that was my rough and my sketchy phase for my part of my painting. It's not too unlike if you're doing oil painting and you tint your canvas for some reason, because you just don't want to stare at that white piece. This is after I put the alcohol wash on it. You see what happens to all the darks? They're just more vibrant, and you can start seeing the contrast of colors. This is working through it, starting to add some of the details. This is where I usually try to stop. It's about 90% done, and I needed to rest and just give it the gift of time. This was it done as I presented it to the show, and that happened to be in Whitewater this spring, and I happened to be awarded Best of Show with that picture this spring in Whitewater at the university. Here's my palette afterwards, and that is really, it's not very much. Usually I try to set up a palette beforehand, but then by the time I get done, that tray will be just saturated with pastel sticks, because you're always looking for the right one, which is why we have so many. This is fixative, and I do like to address fixative because what happens to pastel, my show's called Where the Dust Settles. Pastel is dust, and dust particles have facets with them. And when you spray it, it mats or deadens that luminosity. It deadens the facets of the little particles of dust. So I will spray maybe midstream if I'm finding I'm losing my tooth, that grittiness that's sucking up the pastel, or if I have to rework an area, or if I want to darken an area. Sometimes it's just not dark enough and not having that contrast, and you can spray it with some fixative and it will darken it. But I never spray towards the end because I want to get as much luminosity from the pastels to shine through it as I can. This is a whole different start. This is starting on an art spectrum paper that's been already this color, and I happened to have been giving I was given a stack by somebody, and after I started working with it, I understood why, but it's not my favorite. Anyway, I put this little section in just to show you what happens sometimes. This is along the Comal River, and you can see the picture of the place on the sheet there. And it again was in Texas, the same time period as the bluebonnets. So I decided I'm going to use this orange paper because, or orangish, terracotta, it would contrast the greens and the blues that were in nature. So I get started, and I get started a little bit more, and I start getting my darks in there. And then I get to this point, and I'm just not liking it. I'm not liking the way it's going. I'm not liking it the way this paper is handling my pastel. So I abandoned it. It's still in my easel, one of my easels down in my basement. And I'm not going to throw it away, and I learned a lot from it, but I decided to start over. So I start over by my traditional, favorite way to do it, and again, blocking in those areas, washing them. I might say, when you wash with the alcohol, sometimes you get some wonderful drips. I could have showed you that maybe a little bit better on the Searching for Bluebonnets. But you just get just nice little drips of that alcohol running down that sometimes are wonderful if you're having weeds or foregrounds where you want a little bit of texture coming on in your pieces. So this is a little bit further on. And the finished piece is over behind here. So I was happier with the way that this one turned out. This is another past study, and the reason I put this one in is because to try to make sure that I'm getting my values, at least, that's always a struggle, is the values, because value has to do the work and the color gets the glory. And keeping those values is always a struggle for me. So sometimes I will actually photograph it to find out how dark are my darks. Are my mid values really mid? Or are they dark too? So it's just a helpful tool to me. You probably recognize this place, Minneopa Falls. We were here in the springtime and that water was just roaring down that fall there. So I decided I would do this one. Took out the bridge though. I decided I was going to do it without the bridge, and so here's my preliminary work on it. And it's in the show it's right behind over here on the wall, the finished product. And I put this one, talk about this one for another reason as well. I worked at this picture and I stopped it and I reworked it and I stopped it and I reworked it, and there's a little bit of perfectionist in all of us, I guess, and I just wasn't happy with it. Finally, I framed it up. And it's the day before we're leaving to come up here with all these pictures. And I said, I took it down in the basement and I took it apart and I fixed what was bothering me and put it back together. So, sometimes the rest of the story is, I told one of my pastel friends about this, and he said, "Stop it, quit, it's done." And they say it takes, somebody to paint a picture, it takes somebody to tell you to stop. And sometimes you need to stop and move on. In Wisconsin this spring, we had this, just really everywhere you looked, we had wild phlox everywhere. And one of my friends calls and says, "You gotta come over and see my phlox." And I did, I brought my camera and I just snapped all day. And I ended up doing this piece, which I call sensory overload, because it was just sensory overload. And that's over here next to where Hear the Water Roar picture. I put this one in because it's a whole different style. I actually borrowed this. It's already in a private collection. But this one was done a couple of years ago. It's a whole different style. It was a hot summer afternoon. It was sort of shimmering in the distance. You have that, sort of mist that's coming off of the water. And if you look at it close enough, you'll see it is almost like a serac. It's line to line. There's not a lot of layering. It's almost juxtaposing of lines all the way through it. It took me forever to do it. And I actually physically don't think my hand would handle it now. I have some arthritis stuff going on, and it just, my hand would be tired after working on that for a couple of hours. And I say hours because it took a long time to do. And it was done on a different surface. It's a very rigid board. It's called Pastel board. It's on a piece of masonite, and the piece of masonite is actually coated, and it's an interesting surface to work on. But so that is, I think it's called High Summer Afternoon. Peonies on Canson. Again, I have to have props. This is the kind of board that big one was done on. You can see it's rigid. There's no give to it, and if you touch it, it doesn't even have a real. It has an unusual tooth. Let's put it that way. So it takes a while to get used to it. This is a Canson, and this is a good starting, and actually I think it's probably underrated. It's probably the least expensive paper that you can buy. And it has a sort of waffle weave on one side, but the other side is smooth. And I don't know too many people that use the waffle side. They like to use the smooth side. So this Peonies in the Morning was actually done on a piece of melon-colored Canson paper. So you can see that sort of shining through at the edges. My Hollyhocks is done on my last and my favorite paper of all. It's called Wallace. It's a Belgian mist Wallace. It's gray. They no longer make it. And I just last year did this piece and took my last piece of Wallace because it comes in with nice big sheets. But Katie Wallace was having trouble having somebody manufacture for her, and we all had orders out for more of it, and finally, I'm not quite sure what the story is, but we can no longer get it. So the U-Art paper has sort of started to take over for Katie Wallace's paper. This one's Along the Way, going to church one night, and as I'm going past, I live in that marshy area of Wisconsin, there was this little sunlight on the marsh, and it just, snapped a couple of pictures, and this is called Along the Way, and this was an award winner as well. Area some of you might be familiar with, Sylvan Lake, South Dakota. We were hiking up, it used to be called Harney Peak, and I believe it's called Black Hawk Peak now. And is that right? Yeah. Oh, Black Elk Peak, yeah. And so that was some photographs that I took of that area last summer. Old Shed. This was a landmark in Mankato until just a few years ago. It was up on Pole and Stadium. Every time I'd come to visit Ted, we'd go past that. And it was looking more and more dilapidated. And finally, one time, I just had to stop and I took a picture of it. And the next time I came back, it was gone. So I was glad that I had taken the picture and eventually chose to paint it. This is up near the Heartwood, up near Hayward area. It was a very crispy October morning. The frost had just sort of come off the grasses. And I went out there and snapped a lot of photos. Remember, I do most of my work in-house, so I was not out there painting. Again, up by Holmville Lake, near the Heartwood Center, used to be called Heartwood Schwann Center, up in that area. That is a recent piece, but not a recent picture. Up northern Wisconsin, Cascading. The one that was used on my car is called Northern Retreat, again up in the Wisconsin Hayward area. We love to go up there. It's so beautiful. This one is called what did I call it? Oh, it was from Tom's Cabin, that's right. This is the Chippewa flowage. And it was just beautiful. We had a cabin up there for a weekend. Every evening was just gorgeous, and decided to paint that one. This is one of my last pieces in the show. It's also one of the last pieces I did before the show. Now that, the phlox were in the spring, and now we're starting to have all the wonderful goldenrod and the asters and all this amazing foliage. And I would like to call attention to that because, look how the Lord paints pictures. When you look outside at nature and study it, and you see how you get those complementary colors, the yellows and the purples and the oranges, and they're just all there. And, we're trained to do that, look for the complements, and yet you just go outside nature and it's already there for you. So this one is, I think, late summer blooms. Naming your pictures is like naming your children. What name's going to best suit them? And then finally, there's a few thoughts to ponder. I used to be a teacher and I'm a mom. So this one is to, I can't read it from here. Yeah, concentrate on the process, not the product. I think so many of us get caught up in what's going to be like at the end. that we are so focused on the end result that we forget it's the process that's important. You need to do over and over. And if you concentrate on the process, the product will follow. That's for all of us, not just the students tonight. We all need to remember that. And this is one of my favorite quotes because I need to remind myself of this one. Perfection leads to procrastination, and guess what? That leads to paralysis. When you think about it, you're afraid you're not going to do it well enough, so you don't get started to doing it at all. And, you know, we're not perfect. We're human beings, and each piece is different, each of us is different. Each of us have our gifts and abilities. And that's my last point. To your own self be true. The Lord has given each of you an amazing range of gifts and abilities. You want to use them to His glory. So thank you for letting me share my story. And I would like, hopefully, students and all of you, you know, that some of you would venture out and try the really user-friendly pastels, but also a very challenging medium. Thank you so much. And thank you again to the art department for inviting me tonight. I appreciate it so much. It was so much fun. And questions? Anybody? Questions? I'm sure I totally answered everything right. Yes?
You mentioned the spray toward the end to preserve it. Do the pastels still fade, or do you use something additional as a glass or something?
Perfect question. Thank you. I actually skipped over that part. Thank you, Bruce. Yes, pastels have to be put under glass. And that, again, is, I think, one of the reasons it's sometimes a yo-yo art form, because, you know, you do have oil paints, which are sort of gorgeous. And actually, pastels are usually constructed the same way in oil paint. I do mine the same way, with, you know, the darks and then building up to the lights. I'm not sure what method's taught here, but that was the method that I learned back in school. And you do have to preserve them, but I never spray them towards the end, but they're always put under glass. And I was going to address how they're framed. And thank you. If you just one more minute, I'll just very briefly. After a pastel work is finished, you know, to keep that dust from totally taking over, I take it outside and I like to give it just a couple taps to get rid of all the loose, gritty stuff. And then I take it inside and I'll take a piece of, usually it's newsprint, lay it on top of the pastel and just rub with, sometimes with a big spoon, and just varnish that pastel right into the surface. And then maybe just give it another shake. You don't want to shake it too hard. You don't want to lose your image. I've done that before, especially if you're on velour paper. You have to be really careful. And then I will take, there's usually a piece of foam core. This is all UV. It's just all very, I can't say the words, otherwise I would. It will last a long time, okay? And then it's the foam core, and then it's the pastel piece, and then my glass. And I use only UV glass. I use True View glass, so it doesn't distort the image. Put it together, and then this is the little controversy right now. They used to frame them like this way back when, by doing it like a sandwich and then taping all the way around the edges with framer's tape, and that keeps the moisture out. It also keeps the pastel work in place. And then just frame it. That's the method I've been using on a lot of these. Another method is to put the spacers in to keep the pastel work away from the glass. A mat serves that purpose, but if you look, a lot of times you'll see a little bit of that pastel residue along the edges of the mats, especially if they're not, you know, if they've been roughly handled. Moisture is not a friend to pastels. You know how I wet that pastel and I got a whole different kind of wash with it? So moisture can be your friend as you're building it, but you don't want moisture to get in there to mold it and destroy it. Sun, as he asked as well too, as any artwork, you should keep it out of direct sun. But pastels are supposed to have a pretty good rate of not fading. I don't want to risk finding out, so I keep mine away from the sun. Any other questions? Thank you. Yes?
Suzanne, this is really interesting. Thank you. You talked about what you do is painting. So I have very, very minimal understanding of pastels. I have a little bit of teaching art at DMLC, my experience. What I remember is more like what I would call coloring, and then you take your finger and rub a little bit on the paper. So what was, you're calling it painting, what is the technique upon, how do you put the pastel on the paper?
Ray likes to call them my crayons. There's something very elementary about holding a pastel stick in your hand. You know, and I almost brought them tonight, and they're so messy. You know, they're dusty, and I just thought, you know, we're going to create a very big dust storm here. So I didn't, but I probably should have. But yes, you hold it in your hand and you just put it on, like you say. There's a direct contact with the paper and the pastel. So you don't have a paintbrush or anything else that's separating you. You have direct contact with that paper. And I think that's one of the things that appeals to me. Going back to my roots, right? Kindergarten. So, but they are, Ray often calls them my crayons, just teasingly. But does that answer it?
Do you ever take your finger and kind of rub it in?
Yes, sometimes I'll do some blending. But you try to, you know, the different pastels will help you with blending. Like if I want to blend in some areas, sometimes I'll use a hard pastel to rub in the areas or to blend area to area. Sometimes pastel pencils come in handy for that as well, to sort of push the pastel away. There's just so many techniques, but those are some I do use. I don't do a lot of smearing or rubbing. Sometimes in a sky area, if you want to get a really smooth look, you might take and do that. And then you mentioned too, there's always a little discrepancy too, whether it's a drawing or a painting. And from what I guess in my group, basically we go by, if the surface is covered with pastel, it's a painting. If it's not, like some of Degas, maybe you might call them more a drawing. So, thank you for that question. Others? Yes?
Okay, this is not a planted question, but I'm pretty sure there are two little boys in this crowd that are wondering how you might cover up your imperfections or things that you want to sharpen without totally erasing the work that you've already done. How do you get past the mistakes, imperfections that you might want to fine-tune a little bit in your piece?
I'm really working on that. Yeah, there are some techniques that work out. There are certain erasers that you can use, like a gum or a kneaded eraser to lift up the pastel. I have, and I don't think I have it here, there's, you know when you go into the hardware store and you get those sponge brushes for putting on paint? They're wonderful for pastel work because you can take and you actually can brush off a lot of layers of pastel with it. Or even just taking a regular bristle brush, taking it outside and just giving it a good scrubbing. Some of these papers you can actually wash off the image pretty well. But it's not like an oil painting where you can just, you know, I used to love that when I was doing oil painting and you're unhappy with it. So what did you do? You just go over it or started over with a brand new, and you had all this wonderful texture underneath it, and you got some amazing stuff. With pastel, though, you run the risk of it getting muddy and dirty, and it is one of the, again, challenges of pastels. Thank you. Yes?
I'm curious. Some of the pastels are almost a half-inch in diameter, so it's a large object, and I'm surprised by the size of some of your landscapes. It's 10 inches wide. To me, it's a recipe for aggravation to try to do something in this tiny little space. Why you pick a certain range of sizes, and none of them are really, really enormous. So,
yeah.
Why are they that big, and how do you avoid pulling your hair out? Because
my poor Ray's that one's dead. I'm sorry, you just had to say that. No, again, I start usually with my new pastels, the really hard ones, to build up some of my surfaces, my layers. And I used to use just Sennelier and new pastels, and then as I got, kept on adding to them, I'm using a lot of the schminkies on the creamier ones, but I use them like frosting on a cake. I build it up with some of those basic colors, and then as you get to your textured ones or your highlights and things, that's usually done with a softer and a harder touch as well. Some of if you think of glazing, you sort of glaze the surfaces of pastels as you build up the layers. Does that help? I mean, it definitely, the range of pastels are huge. Actually, one of them that I really love right now is called a Terry Ludwig, and it's quite square. It's just a chunky, probably about a half-inch rectangle on all sides. But you can get that, turn it on its edge, and you get that really nice linear line to draw through with. So the tools, find the tool for the space. That peony one back there, that's all very soft pastels, and it was done very loosely with large pastels, actually. The one that's on the wall back there. Yes?
Do you typically work light to dark or dark to light?
I work dark to light, like oil painters usually do, I think. Watercolors go light to dark, right? Yeah. I usually work dark. Yeah, I do. I know I do. Yes?
You mentioned early, I think in Arizona, you were talking about preliminary drawings, sketches, and then in the Minneopa Falls piece, you omitted the bridge.
Yes.
Could you talk about decision-making a little bit? Because you have photo references, but you're also composing.
Right. Trying to make a good design, the basic techniques of, where's the eye going to go? Where's your focal point going to be? I found that for me, the bridge was, I wanted my focus to be on the falls. And when I put that, the photograph had the bridge coming across the falls, and it had that huge shadow underneath. And I didn't want that to be the focal point, so I took it out and just, wanted to capture on that whiteness and the eye going to the falls of the roaring water. So yeah, there's always those decisions, and I guess that goes back to what's your story? What you want to say about this piece? Does that help? Okay. Yes?
When you do the alcohol wash,
Mm-hmm.
how much do you put on?
Oh, sometimes a lot. It's sort of fun to do because you're not painting it like you would a watercolor or an oil painting. You're using actually the side of the brush and the old brush, because pastel paper will eat up a brush. And I'm actually going on like this with the side of the brush, not the front of the brush. And just dabbing it in. But sometimes, like I said, I like that water dripping down, especially in a tree line. If you look really close, well, I'm not sure that they usually end up getting hidden, but you get some separation of the pastel from the paper, so you get all those nice little squiggly lines. Sometimes it'll drip down from the darks into the grasses below. So if you want a real control, then you just use less of the alcohol. So again, it's probably just an experimental thing, what to use on what particular part of the painting. So I hope. Usually the sky is the first part I'll do for that, because I don't want to get my darks into the sky, so I'll start with really very, very accurate at that. And also if I have a tree line going into the sky, like I do on the blue bonnets back there, I was very careful that I left that leafy action of the tree going into the sky, that I wasn't muddling that up, because I knew that was going to be part of the Christmas of the paper, or the piece. Yes?
Do you do multiple projects at a time? Or do you, like since you said you stop sometimes, do you go back from other projects or no?
Yes, but not many. I have about 2 to 3 easels going at all the times. You get to that point where you just have to let it rest. You give it the gift of time, and But lots of times you get on a, sort of roll with it, and you just want to keep on going, and one idea sort of gets you going on the other one. So I do work multiple, but I try to, usually I focus on one picture at a time though, with the most part of my energy going into one. So, is that all? Yes?
Talk a little bit about trying to manage art making with a family and a full-time job and a very busy career. How much art were you able to do during that time?
Not much. That's why I kept experimenting with different media, because the children are there, and you do have a full-time job. It's very limited, and that's why I think I enjoy teaching art so much, because it got me connected with the creativity of the kids. And if you ever want to know a creative kid, just talk to Kevin. He was amazing. He did some really unique things, and those are the kinds of kids that made it so much fun teaching art in the elementary school. And I did have a chance to teach too for a while in a high school down in California, and that was fun too. You just get a lot of energy from the kids, but it kept you connected. And that's why I gave up oil painting. Ted says he can still remember the oil in the house, the turpentine and stuff, but I know by the time we moved to California, I wasn't doing it anymore. I did try watercolor for a while, but we had our issues. Watercolor sort of takes, we just weren't good friends. I just some things, but pastels just seem to work. And I think it's partly that, as I was talking over here, is that tactileness about. But yeah, it is, and I think that's why for a lot of people, they give it up. But there's a saying too: you might stop for a while, but don't quit. And even when I started it up again after I retired, I was so frustrated because it just wasn't coming back. You're just having work and work and work. I thought, I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to quit. That was my mantra for a long time. I'm not going to quit. And you finally, now I'm at the point where I do have time for it. So thank you. Yes.
Do you have a favorite, like waterfalls or fields of flowers, or like just the sunflowers? Do you have a favorite that you like to do?
That's a good
Or do you like to
question.
do them all?
I think once you get to make a choice of doing it, you try to see what the challenges of the piece. But I guess if I probably, as you can tell, probably drawn to the landscapes the most, and especially this time of year when it's not those saturated greens where you have a little bit of other stuff going on in nature. I like that. And I like flowers. I do enjoy doing them. I'm just starting to incorporate more people in my work. I have done some, but I didn't really. I brought one, my self-portrait from the back. So, thank you. And one thing I do not really, you see one in here is the winter scene. I don't really care to do winter scenes. It's just not, it's winter. I go down to Arizona, and I grew up in Arizona, and I just, it's cold. It's pretty, there's a lot of color, and it's very subtle color, but I don't enjoy doing it. Yes?
Do you ever do commissions?
Yes. I have one hanging over my head when I get home.
And is it different? Does it feel different?
It does in a way, because you feel like you should produce, that perfection really takes over. Is this going to be perfect enough for them to like? Where you're doing it for yourself, you put your own self into it, and you can like it, or if you don't like it, well, that's okay. I did it. I think it's more pressure. Yep. Well, thank you everybody for being here again. I appreciate it so much.